Mobile alerts become a critical new way to engage the smartphone generation. We have heard a lot about engagement already. Reuters Institute research finds significant audience demand for personalized alerts. So now we are hearing a lot more from Rasmus Nielsen, the director of research at the Reuters Institute at Oxford University, about how to maintain a direct connection with users and what mobile alerts can do in that field.
Thanks very much. I'm Rasmus Nielsen, Director of Research at the Reuters Institute. Our mission is to connect research with the issues faced by journalists and news media organizations all over the world, and we try to make our work timely and accessible. There is no mic.
Yes.
Like all good journalists, you have a very diverse job. Thank you for your help. We try to make our research relevant but also timely for people like yourself who are trying to make very difficult decisions in a very quickly changing environment and under conditions of high uncertainty. One of the things we've been working on recently is this issue of the use of mobile alerts as one of the ways in which publishers are fighting back against the loss of a direct connection with the audience. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to present a piece of research that was led by Nick Newman, a colleague of ours, where we look specifically at this issue of how alerts provide publishers with a new opportunity to develop new direct routes to market, even as other older direct routes are eroding and many connections with the audience are intermediated by platforms. What we did for this project is that we looked at smartphone users in 4 different markets, the US, Taiwan, Germany, and the UK. So the US is a market that many of us always compare our own situation to. Germany and UK as 2 examples of highly developed European markets with different media traditions and different market structures. And then Taiwan is an example of a market that is more technologically developed, in particular in terms of being mobile first, than most European or North American markets. So it gives us, if you will, a window into one possible future for how mobile might develop for news. Specifically, we did a survey with smartphone users, and we also did some in-depth interviews that I'll draw on in this presentation. The full report is available online. I'll tweet a link to it after the presentation. So the background, as said, is this sort of theme that has run throughout a conference like this. It's a world in which publishers are used to control both the content as well as the channels through which the content reached the audience. As we moved online, first, this was still a model, websites, increasingly with mobile, of course, apps. There was still a direct connection with the audience, but increasingly people come to content sideways through search, for example, or through social media, or even through aggregators. So increasingly, publishers face a situation where their relationship with the audience is intermediated by platform companies of various sorts. What we see is that more and more publishers, of course, are trying to develop new direct channels to market to reach their audiences directly. Email newsletters has had an interesting resurgence. Sort of the original digital medium in many ways is really being developed by many publishers, Quartz, New York Times, and others who've spoken at this conference, but also the specific issue of mobile alerts that I will talk about today. So first, I want to provide just a little bit of sort of a summary of the headlines ahead. So the first point is that mobile alerts are growing quite rapidly, in particular in the most developed markets like Taiwan, but also the US, and we also see significant growth increasingly across Europe. The second point is that most smartphone users at this point do not get news alerts, but many more could be persuaded to sign up, and we can see this in particularly when we compare more mature markets like Taiwan with the situation in Western Europe. It's clear that though alerts offer a direct route to market, of course the issues of platforms sort of sneak back in through the back door again, because some of these alerts are dependent upon the functionalities of the operating systems provided by the platform companies. This produces some risks, some platform risk, but also very, very serious opportunities for richer content to moving beyond the alert as just a headline, if you will. And finally, right now, our research suggests that legacy media companies are still the ones who are doing best in terms of news alerts, but it's clear that there is a risk that aggregators, for example, will make a significant move in this space. So first, I want to present a little bit of sort of content in terms of the broader landscape of alerts so we can see where news fits into the experience of the user. As several speakers at the conference have underlined, smartphones, of course, are very, very personal devices, and one of the things that we have to contend with all the time as we think about publishing and the experience of consuming news is that it's consumed increasingly within an environment that is primarily used for other purposes. So in terms of alerts, specifically, we surveyed these smartphone users in the markets that I mentioned in terms of what kinds of alerts that they get. And it's important to see here that the majority of alerts, of course, are not for news. They are personal and productivity-related alerts. It's things like getting messages from messaging apps, it's emails, it's calendar reminders, it's social media activities, things that are quite sort of tied to either a personal or a professional experience and everyday life coordination. News is relatively widespread and surprisingly in some ways more widespread than notifications for things like gaming, for example. So news is not fallen completely behind, but it's clear that the broader environment for alerts is still primarily around personal and professional issues more than about news and information. A second aspect of the context into which publishers are moving when they try to develop alerts, mobile alerts and notifications, is that it's clear that because mobile is such a personal experience, such a personal device, people are very careful with whom they allow the privilege of sending them alerts. So we asked people about whether they had any concerns about allowing apps and publishers to send them alerts, and unsurprisingly, a very, very high percentage in all markets, including very mature markets like Taiwan, agree that they are very careful with what kinds of information they allow apps and publishers to push towards them, and the interviews gave us some sort of qualitative sense, if you will, of some of the issues at play. So people say, you know, I use my phone for personal day-to-day life and I don't want it to be filled up with stuff that I don't need. There is perhaps a reminder there for some publishers who've been pushing notifications too aggressively. You know, it keeps on buzzing until you see them. It's like it's bugging you all day long. I feel compelled to check them immediately, but of course if there is no value there, then that's not going to last very long. So it's very clear that users are quite discriminating in this space, and you really have to get the experience right from their point of view. As much as you want a direct route to market, of course, as with so much else in this environment, you have to think of the user first and foremost. The third sort of broader contextual issue is that while most people see alerts as generally useful and accept alerts as a way in which they can get served information on their mobile device, it's also clear that there is a significant minority of people who are willing to act on their discontent if they feel they're being bugged by notifications that do not serve them well. So about a quarter of the people we surveyed, the smartphone users we surveyed across these 4 markets, say they've uninstalled an app in the last year because of the notifications that came with it. So there is obviously there, if you will, a warning that you really need to get this right. It's not getting it right. It's not simply that people will ignore you. It's that you may lose the opportunity to develop a connection with them via your app. So when we turn from this context of the broader landscape of alerts specifically to the issue of news, I'll provide a little bit of data in terms of what we found in the 4 markets that we looked at. So first, about a quarter of smartphone users in these 4 markets, in the UK and in Germany, say that they get news alerts on their smartphone. It's a bit higher than that in the US, and interestingly, quite a lot higher than that in Taiwan, this more developed market, so about 40%. And remember, all of these are smartphone users. So this is not about a lag right now in device adoption. This is more about socialization and culture and whether publishers have been able to develop offers that people actually feel add value. And there in Taiwan and to some extent the US, publishers seem to be somewhat ahead of publishers in the UK and Germany, suggesting that there is an opportunity to reach more people. When we drill down and ask people why they have, when we drill down and ask those people who do get news alerts why they do so, it's important to note that the key motivations really are around keeping informed, in particular with sort of a twist towards this issue of sort of urgency, either being the first to know about important news or worries about safety and security. So as we all know, there's been some very unfortunate incidents, including here in Berlin, where people may want to know these things or at least feel that they will get this information very quickly if it should happen close to them. So these things are important to people, but it's also important to note that there are some things that are much less frequently mentioned as a reason for signing up or using news alerts, like something to talk about with friends. And the reason I highlight this, which only about 30% of the respondents say is a motivation for using news alerts, is that when we think about, again, one of these issues that run through a conference like this, platform optimization, how do you optimize your offerings in a way that is suited to the particular channel through which you're trying to serve your users? In the particular case of news alerts, you're not going to be optimizing for shareability or optimizing for engagement. This is not what this is about. It's a different kind of channel, and you have to keep that in mind as you think about how you develop your offers. So these are the reasons offered by the people who do get news alerts, of why they get them and what they like about them. We can also look at the people who don't get news alerts, which is still a majority in all 4 markets of smartphone users. What are the reasons that they mention? The top one is the worry about too many and irrelevant alerts. This is, again, a warning to publishers that you really don't want to flood the zone here. You're in real risk of losing touch with your users if you do that. Of course, there's also a collective dimension to this. I think we can all recognize, those of us in the room who may have more than one news app, that you get multiple alerts for the same news story from different publishers. And from a publisher point of view, that's, of course, very sensible. But from a user point of view, this is not a great experience. There are also people who have a range of different reasons. So we try to sort of group these different types of people who haven't embraced news alerts yet. We talk about people we think of as sort of avoiders. So these are people who are interested in news but prefer not to be interrupted with news on their smartphone. So they may get your app, but they will probably disable notifications because they don't want those pop-ups. Then there are the people who we call sort of overloaded, so people who feel overloaded in general with notifications, but also perhaps particularly with news, which doesn't always strike them as relevant for them. And then there are the people we call, sort of in a sort of slightly playful term, friendsters, people who prefer to keep alerts and notifications primarily for social purposes. So they've embraced alerts and notifications, but they don't want to use it for news. They are probably not professional journalists or PR folks, right? So it doesn't actually matter for them whether they know the news the moment it's happened or whether they know it in the morning or in the evening when they check their phone or in their lunch break. So this is sort of a different use that you need to be sensitive to as you think about your alerts strategy. So we asked specifically these people who don't get alerts yet how they think about things that might get them to sign up for alerts. Again, we have tried to sort of categorize these people. About 40% basically say quite bluntly, nothing would encourage me to use or install news alerts. Okay, well, you can sort of leave those aside, but that still leaves quite a lot of people, right? So there is still an opportunity here. Personalization is a big issue. A lot of people talk about active personalization. I want to be able to control what's pushed to this very personal device of mine. And there are also a number of people who are what we call sort of controllers, so who want to curate the alerts that they actually get. So it's not necessarily about personalizing to subjects, but more about controlling the inflow of content itself. So if this is the market in terms of where we are now, and this survey was in the field late in the fall last year, so if we turn to sort of what publishers are trying to do to capitalize on this opportunity and moving forward, I will highlight a few examples of what different publishers around the world are working on. So as said, control and personalization is a key issue for a lot of the users who are sympathetic to the idea that they might allow news alerts and notifications in the future but haven't done it yet. So unsurprisingly, this is one issue that a lot of publishers are working with, both active personalization, where you as a user go in and control your settings to get certain kinds of things, but also passive personalization, where you try to use audience data to generate recommendations that are tailored in some way to individual users. Here are a couple of examples of active personalization, like, for example, The Guardian that did this around the Olympics, but also ways of using something like a quiz, for example, to offer a more engaging experience around notifications rather than just the push of a headline. So a quiz, in this case, from The Guardian. There are also other new developments underway. Some of them have been touched upon in the course of the conference. So, for example, as we see this very, very rapid rise in messaging apps as a sort of a new environment for distributed content, a new platform, we see more and more publishers who are developing chatbots to work, for example, via Facebook Messenger. So, again, the platforms creep in through the back door. This might at one point look like a new direct route to market, but of course some of these routes are dependent on the environments created by platform companies like Facebook. As the operating systems evolve, there are new opportunities in terms of what kind of content you can actually offer people. This is beyond the alert, just as the headline, X happened, click here. So for example, we've seen in the US with the election, but also around other issues, these sort of rich media payloads delivered via iOS to direct to smartphones so that the The alert here is, for example, the NBC alert with a map of performance in different states in the US election, or the Guardian alert with live data in the actual alert itself. But there are other examples of alerts like this developing beyond politics. But this is just a few examples of how some news organizations are developing much richer alerts than the ones we're used to. And really the question, I suppose, here is that how far can you take this? What are all the different use cases that will become possible and all the different forms of alerts that will become possible? So just one example of one possible future frontier for this would be, for example, what Mike has done in the US, which is where you can enable now notifications where you can get the video behind the headline live on your lock screen without actually having to do anything apart from just clicking on the lock screen itself. So this is a new frontier in terms of where news organizations are trying to develop news alerts and mobile notifications in ways that help deliver rich content, distinct content, content that is branded so you can actually recognize it through a new direct channel to market that I hope we will see many of you experimenting with in your own organizations as we move forward. So just very quickly recapping the main points, and then I'll take any questions that there might be. And as said, I'll tweet the underlying research. If people are interested, they can reach out to me or to Nick Newman, who led this work for us. It's clear that that the development of platforms like the Android operating system and Apple notification platforms is as important in many ways in the longer term in terms of how we develop new digital news offerings as the more visible issue of things like Facebook Instant Articles or Google AMP, in the sense that they are offering new opportunities to develop direct connections with the audiences that you're trying to serve and that you're also building your business model around. It's also clear from a user point of view, as our audience research suggests, that there is an unmet need for more relevant alerts on issues of personal interest, that there are real risks when you walk into this space because people feel that the smartphone is a very personal device, and if you get it wrong, they will take it personally, as they should. But there is an unmet need, and people are interested in getting more of your great content served direct to them on their smartphone. So you can start with your existing app users, but there is also a question of whether you can reach a broader audience here. Finally, a large issue here will be to get the right balance between passive personalization, where you do the work of tailoring the content to the user, and then active personalization, where you give the user the ability to control the content that she is served through your app. So there is a possibility here to use alerts to build loyalty and ultimately revenue, but again, you're not going to be alone in this space, so the tensions, if you will, and the race between publishers and platforms in terms of how we best serve the audience will be as relevant when it comes to mobile alerts as it has been with digital news more broadly. With that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll turn it over to you for questions from the audience.
Thank you very much. I love speaker who is faster than me. Thank you very much, Rasmus. Really compelling talk. Any questions from you? We have 3 minutes, then his flight is going out. Okay, may I drop two? First question is there or will there be any research if going through the door via the alert might then have any consequences for further engagement, reaching out to subscription, etc.? Do you think there might be a connection that goes so far? Sorry, your mic.
I mean, I think there is no question that there is a connection that goes so far. We don't have access to the in-house data from publishers. I would be very surprised if the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the FT do not find that their alerts and notifications help convert casual users. But every organization will have a different strategy for this. But I think it's very clear that most high-end publishers right now are thinking about conversion to subscription, and this is one of the ways in which you try to get people in, cultivate a habit, and as Andrew said before, give people that experience, that you care about them, that you serve them well, so that they wake up to the idea that they might actually pay you for the service that you provide.
Second question, I thought when to address the audience first with these alerts, and I asked myself, are elections or catastrophes or anything like that a good invitation to say, if you need something now, we are here to serve you because it's a specific need, to then normalize it further?
I mean, I think from my point of view, this is one of the real frontiers of innovation where it's really important to try to really understand what your audience appreciate My personal view is that I think we've seen a lot of really interesting work around breaking news alerts. And it's understandable that a lot of publishers have started there, but I think there's also a risk that we overdo it. You know, most of us in this room are journalists. We really care about news. We really care about breaking news. And you'll get an endless number of alerts and notifications around elections. You know, this is the result from this polling place. This is the result from that polling place. This is this, that, and the other. And really, at the end of the day, most people only want to know about the general result. So you can overdo that. And there is also a risk, I think, that you, even though our research suggests that breaking news and sort of situations of urgency, whether of a benign nature like an election or slightly less benign nature like a terror incident or the like, is one of the main things people value about alerts. I think there is an opportunity also to be the kind of organization that gives gifts to your loyal readers. You know, resurface something to them that you know they have not consumed, but you think they might like. That has a shelf life. It doesn't always have to be tied specifically to breaking news.
Okay, thank you very much, Rasmus. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.